In a dimly lit room inside a modest Nigerian home, 14-year-old Adi stands frozen, holding a gun in her trembling hands. Her short, messy hair frames her dark-skinned face, which is blank, void of emotion. Lying on the floor before her is the body of her mother, Nena, motionless in a pool of blood. Nena, dressed in a simple dress, looks peaceful in death, the life drained from her eyes. The small bed and wooden wardrobe in the background do little to soften the cold reality of the scene Adi now faces. In an old family photograph, a younger Adi stands with her mother Nena and her stepfather Chidi outside their modest suburban home. Nena's proud smile beams as she wraps her arm around Adi's, who wears a neat school uniform and braids. Chidi, a tall man with a gentle face, stands beside them, his hand resting on Adi's shoulder. Though they all smile, Adi's eyes reveal a subtle tension even in this seemingly happy moment. Inside Adi's small bedroom, the walls are adorned with certificates and trophies, showcasing her academic achievements. Adi sits at a cluttered desk, visibly stressed, her head buried in her hands. Her mother, Nena, stands behind her, arms crossed, her face turned with unspoken expectations. Adi's, overwhelmed by the pressure, wears her school uniform, her tired eyes betraying her inner turmoil. Alone in her dimly lit room, Adi stares blankly at the wall, deep in thought. She is wearing a simple t-shirt and shorts, her short braids resting limply on her shoulders. The sparse furnishings, a small bed and desk, highlight the emptiness she feels inside. The weight of her dark thoughts grows heavier, solidifying into a dangerous plan. Late at night, Adi stands in her stepfather Chidi's room, holding the gun she has just taken from a drawer. Her expression is calm but determined as she stares at the weapon in her hands. The soft moonlight filtering through the window highlights her deep brown skin and the solemnity of the moment. The modest room, with its simple bed and dresser, seems to close in around her as tension fills the air. 3 gunshots echo through the house. Adi stands over her mother's lifeless body in the dim light of the bedroom. Nena lies on her back, blood pooling beneath her, her eyes open but vacant. Adi's, her face still expressionless, grips the gun tightly, frozen in the aftermath of her actions. The stillness of the room amplifies the horror, with nothing but the quiet hum of the night around her. Chidi, a tall man in his late 40s with short hair and dark skin, walks into the darkened house, unaware of the tragedy that has unfolded. Adi hides in the shadows, her cold eyes watching his every move. She clutches the gun to her chest, her heart racing, as Chidi walks toward the living room, oblivious to the danger lurking nearby. Adi runs down a deserted street in the dead of night, her face pale with fear under the faint street lights. She wears a simple t-shirt and jeans, her short braids bouncing as she sprints away from the house. Behind her, the home she shared with her family fades into the distance. The street is empty, with only the dark outlines of neighboring houses and the oppressive silence of the night. At the local police station, Adi sits handcuffed, her face a blank mask as officers stand around her, discussing the crime. She wears casual clothes, her dark braids slightly disheveled. The small, plain room is a world away from the chaos of her home. As the officers exchange glances, their disbelief is palpable. Adi's, however, remains emotionless, staring down at the cold floor. In court, Adi sits at the defense table, her hands cuffed in front of her. She is dressed in an oversized orange prison jumpsuit, her young face expressionless as the judge, Justice Olimide, reads out the charges against her. The courtroom is packed with spectators, their faces reflecting shock and sadness. Chidi sits in the front row, his eyes swollen from crying, his head bowed as the weight of his wife's death hangs over him. On the witness stand, Adi sits with a blank expression, her dark eyes staring straight ahead. Her hair is tied back in short braids, and she wears her prison jumpsuit, its bright orange color contrasting with her deep brown skin. The courtroom falls silent as she speaks, her voice calm and measured. "I had no choice. Chidi takes the stand, his tall frame slumped as he recounts the night he found his wife, Nena, dead on the floor. His hands shake, and his voice cracks as he speaks. His kind face is now etched with grief and disbelief, his dark skin a stark contrast to the white walls of the courtroom. Behind him, Adi sits motionless at the defense table, staring at the floor. A panel of psychologists, led by Dr. Amoka, a woman in her 40s with glasses and a calm demeanor, sits in the courtroom discussing Adi's mental state. Dr. Amoka explains how Adi's young age and traumatic experiences may have influenced her actions. The jury listens intently, some glancing over at Adis, who sits quietly, staring at the ground, her face a mask of indifference. In a small, dimly lit room, 12 jurors sit around the table, deep in debate. They come from different walks of life, their faces reflecting the weight of the decision before them. One juror, a middle-aged man with his head in his hands, stares at the word "the guilty" written on the paper in front of him. The tension in the room is palpable, as they try to decide Adi's fate. Outside the courthouse, a group of Adi's classmates from school stands in a huddle, talking quietly to reporters. They are still in their school uniforms, their faces a mix of shock and sadness. Chioma, Adi's best friend, steps forward, her voice trembling as she describes the quiet girl she thought she knew. Behind them, the imposing walls of the courthouse stand as a grim reminder of what has transpired. Adi's room is eerily still, its once vibrant walls filled with certificates and trophies now feel oppressive. The perfectly made bed and the neatly laid out school uniform on the chair contrast with the emotional chaos Adis felt before the crime. On her desk sits a photo of Adis and her mother Nena, both smiling, a snapshot of a life that seems impossibly distant. In an empty classroom, Adis sits alone, her face buried in her hands. The red C on the exam paper before her is a testament to her recent struggles. Her school uniform is still neat, but her braided hair has lost its usual polish. The teacher stands quietly at the front of the room, watching Adis with concern, but says nothing. The academic posters on the walls only heighten the sense of failure and pressure. At the defense table, Adis' lawyer, Barrister Ifani, argues passionately for his client. The middle-aged man, with glasses patched on his nose, pleads with the jury to see Adis as the child she is, a victim of overwhelming pressure and circumstances. Behind him, Adis sits quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her face devoid of emotion. The jury listens, some nodding, while others remain stoic. On the opposite side of the courtroom, the prosecutor, Mrs. Adebayo, stands tall and commanding before the jury. Dressed in a sharp black suit, she holds up a photo of the crime scene for the jury to see. Her face is stern, her voice unwavering as she argues that Adis should be held fully accountable for her actions. The room is silent as Mrs. Adebayo lays out her case, while Adis sits impassively at the defense table. The courtroom is packed as Justice Olumide delivers the final verdict. Adis, dressed in her oversized orange jumpsuit, sits quietly at the defense table, her face betraying no emotion. Behind her, Chidi watches with a mix of grief and acceptance, his head bowed. The spectators hold their breath as the guilty verdict is read aloud, the weight of the moment sinking in. Outside the courthouse, a divided crowd gathers. Some hold signs pleading for justice, while others cry out for leniency, believing Adis is still a child in need of help. A woman in her 30s, tears streaming down her face, holds a sign that reads, "She was just a child." Nearby, reporters scramble to interview anyone they can, the scene chaotic and emotionally charged. Adis sits on the metal bed in her cold prison cell, staring blankly at the grey walls. Her orange jumpsuit is too big, making her small frame seem even more fragile. Her hair is unkempt, and her face shows no sign of emotion, only exhaustion. A single barred window lets in a sliver of light, casting shadows across the floor. In the corner, a simple toilet and sink add to the starkness of her new reality. Barrister Ifani, now with grayer hair and deeper lines on his face, stands in front of a new judge, Justice Adetokunbo, appealing for a retrial. His voice is determined, arguing that Adiz was too young to truly understand the consequences of her actions. The girl sits behind him in the courtroom, wearing a slightly cleaner orange jumpsuit, her face still blank, her hands folded in her lap. The judge, an older woman with a stern expression, listens carefully. The courtroom is quieter this time, with fewer people present. A new trial begins, and the girl sits in the same courtroom, her face showing more signs of weariness. She is in the same orange jumpsuit, but now her hair is neatly braided. Her lawyer stands before the jury, explaining the girl's mental state and the pressures she was under. The jury looks more thoughtful this time, with some jurors glancing at the girl with sympathy. The room is filled with tension, and the background shows the faint outline of reporters through the courthouse windows. A psychologist stands in the courtroom, speaking directly to Ada, and afterward she learnt her lesson the hard way.